We are live with a man who I think at this point needs no introduction.
The most influential public intellectual in the Western world.
One of the world's most controversial thinkers.
Hi.
Jordan Peterson.
Professor Jordan Peterson.
Jordan Peterson.
Peterson gained national notoriety when he spoke out about a federal bill on gender expression.
I am not going to be a mouthpiece for language that I detest, and that's that.
His new self-help book, 12 Rules for Life, is already a bestseller. Hundreds of thousands subscribe to his online lectures, his speeches regularly attract protests, and his new speaking tour is selling out.
It feels like a movement, and I'm excited to be a part of it.
Dr. Peterson has changed my life. He has reminded me that I should first and foremost clean my room.
Tell us about the lobster.
Well, that's quite a segue. I think the whole group identity thing is seriously pathological.
Just get it straight. You're saying that we should organize our societies along the lines of the lobsters.
The way that you deal with this is to put yourself together.
We don't need to be taught how to wipe our ass by Jordan Peterson.
What good is a clean room in Rome going to do when Alaric the Goth is sacking your city?
The group identity emerge only when necessary, and
they're trying to come up with a way to keep the right on the reservation. And that's what Jordan Peterson is doing in the world of philosophy, which I call Jordanetics, is ultimately anti-Christian, it's poisonous, and it's riddled from start to finish with mental illness. This guy is the crazy Christ. I mean, he has a Messiah complex. He actually wrote to his father and said,
I think I've discovered something that no one else has any idea about.
It's clear that we're not dealing with somebody who is mentally well.
When it was literally driving me crazy, often dreaming extremely violent dreams. What shall I do with my newfound hand of glory? I waited for a reply, and almost immediately an answer revealed itself.
Write down the words you want inscribed on your soul.
I'm a media whore, you know.
The Madness of Jordan Peterson. Although I had heard about a Canadian academic who became an unexpected hero to American conservatives through his YouTube videos and a best-selling self-help book, I did not pay Jordan Peterson any notice until it was brought to my attention that he was repeating exaggerated and long disproven claims about the intelligence of a minority group.
the average Ashkenazi IQ is somewhere between 110 and 115, which is about one standard deviation above the population average.
While anyone can be misled by unreliable sources, what made me suspicious of his intellectual integrity was the way that he immediately doubled down and resorted to name-calling and disingenuous rhetoric when called out for his error by his better-informed readers. The way in which I was energetically denounced by his fans and accused of everything from jealousy to mental retardation for the heinous crime of publicly correcting him only made me more dubious about the man. It didn't take very long to discover that the man was something very, very different than the public figure whom conservatives were praising so highly.
What do you think are the things that people, and I'm especially thinking of your opponents, get wrong about you?
Their basic proposition is that, first of all, that I'm a right-winger of some sort, and that's just not the case.
Virtually nothing that is believed to be true about Jordan Peterson is actually true. Jordan Peterson is not a Christian. Jordan Peterson is not a conservative. Jordan Peterson is not a defender of Western civilization or Western culture. Jordan Peterson is not post-ideological. Jordan Peterson is not a hero. Jordan Peterson is not a right-winger of any sort. Jordan Peterson is not a prophet. Jordan Peterson's thoughts are not too advanced for ordinary people to follow. And most importantly, most of the time, Jordan Peterson simply does not know what he's talking about.
The hell do I know?
Nirmal Das, a Canadian author and PhD who specializes in translating ancient languages, observes that Jordan Peterson is poorly educated and lacks a basic knowledge of religion, history, theology, philosophy, science, and logic. He writes, "He misconstrues the Logos and blasphemes his way through the Old Testament and the Gospels. As for history, just one example suffices. No, Jesus is not a version of the Egyptian god Osiris. This nonsense comes from Gerald Massey, a 19th century crackpot who faked evidence to make such claims.
Keep talking, bucko. Pretty soon I'm going to have you right where I want you.
This comprehensive charge of general ignorance may sound difficult to believe.
And I've always felt like a complete idiot.
So there now, I've got my quack-quack-a-whack.
But remember, Jordan Peterson admitted that he had never even read through the entire Bible before he began delivering his series of lectures on it.
Jesus, what the hell did I do?
The readily observable fact is that very few Jordan Peterson fans have ever taken any trouble to actually read what he has written. Unlike most of his fans, I've read the 12 Rules, Maps of Meaning, and the United Nations Secretary General's high-level panel on global sustainability, Resilient People, Resilient Planet, A Future Worth Choosing. And I can attest that the charge of comprehensive ignorance is an accurate one. For example, throughout the entire 564 pages of Maps of Meaning, there are precisely 0 direct references to such minor intellectual figures as Aristotle, Socrates, Epictetus, Augustine, Marcus Aurelius, and Thomas Aquinas. By way of example, no man even remotely familiar with the Greek and Roman skeptics could possibly have produced such an incredibly ignorant statement as this.
Prior to the time of Descartes, Bacon, and Newton, man lived in an animated spiritual world, saturated with meaning, imbued with moral purpose.
But now we think empirically, and the spirits that once inhabited the universe have vanished.
The clue is right there in the most famous skeptic's name, Sextus Empiricus.
I'm very, very, very careful with my words.
Jordan Peterson's customary approach to a subject is to take simple, straightforward concepts and redefine them in order to transform their core meanings to suit whatever he is saying at the moment. Even worse, he assigns multiple meanings and contradictory definitions to those concepts, making it literally impossible to know with any degree of confidence what he's actually saying. He does this in order to allow the listener to assign his own meaning to Peterson's words. It's a psychological technique that can be described as preemptive mirroring, as Peterson's rambling incoherence permits the listener to hear what he is seeking to hear and feel that his preconceived views are substantiated by the authority of Peterson's presumed wisdom. Peterson is purposefully saying nothing in order to leave a hole of meaning that the listener will dutifully provide and credit to him. This is why different Peterson fans will almost invariably disagree about what he has said. Peterson says, "When I lecture, I'm not saying what I believe to be the case, but thinking on my feet, trying to extend and clarify my knowledge while also communicating." To the extent that there is any actual content to Peterson's lectures, they are narcissistic monologues aimed primarily at himself. This is why those who have read Peterson's books tend to have a much lower opinion of him than those who attend his lectures and watch his videos. His technique of preemptive mirroring does not work when one can so easily see the contradictions and incoherencies littering each and every page. But when he's on stage, if you react poorly to one of Peterson's positions, you have only but to wait a little while and he will produce another one you will find more to your liking.
Clean up your room.
Peterson's incoherent and self-contradictory philosophy can best be described as Clintonian, as he repeatedly redefines everything from Christianity to God and the very concept of truth itself. Just listen to these absurd, nonsensical definitions he puts forward when asked what he means by God. God is the mode of being you value the most, spirit that is trying to elevate being, that makes everything come together. Truthful speech that rectifies pathological hierarchies. How we imagine and collectively represent the existence and action consciousness across time. The selection mechanism, which judges which men are worthy. Collectively, these statements can clearly be seen to be pure baffle garble. String them together and you'll see that they're entirely nonsensical. Truthful speech is a selection mechanism that rectifies pathological hierarchies, which is how we imagine the existence of consciousness trying to elevate being. Bucko. That's nonsense.
I think that's silly. I really do.
And it leads to the obvious question, what makes speech truthful? If Peterson is to be believed, truth is that which serves life in a Darwinian manner.
Like the fundamental axiom that I'm playing with is something that was basically expressed by Nietzsche, and it's a definition of truth. And so I would say, if it doesn't serve life, it's not true.
Or to put it more bluntly and clearly, the truth, the Darwinian pragmatic truth, to be specific, is anything you believe that happens to increase your odds of survival. This, you will note, is a concept that directly contradicts the concept of truth as the dictionary and pretty much everyone else in the history of the planet has ever understood it.
Okay, that makes sense. Except, I would say that God is dead and human beings are like a cancer on the planet.
Thanks to this perverted redefinition of truth, Peterson even concludes that facts are not necessarily true.
Then I would say that I don't think that facts are necessarily true.
But Peterson doesn't just play philosophically fast and loose when it comes to facts, figures, and definitions. He can't even answer a straightforward yes or no question honestly.
Do you believe that Jesus rose again from the dead? Literally.
I find it, I cannot answer that question. And the reason is because, okay, let me think about it for a minute, see if I can come up with a reasonable answer to that. Well, the first answer would be, it depends on what you mean by Jesus.
A historical human being that existed
in a body. And
in a body.
In a body. Do you believe that or do you not believe it? You know, it's not, it's I don't know.
Now come on, is this really the first time that Peterson has ever considered that question? And yet he did manage to answer a related question a little bit more directly. Do you go to church? No. In my experience, the ministers are too frequently lying. I can't stand to hear them say words they don't believe. But how could a man who doesn't even know what he believes possibly know what others truly believe? How can he know they are lying about Jesus when that would entirely depend upon what they mean by Jesus? And how can a man who claims that facts are not necessarily true possibly claim that anyone else is lying? Now, we've recently seen Peterson and public figures on the left who have been elevated and promoted as an acceptable opposition by the mainstream media. The most notorious example being the New York Times' proclamation of the intellectual dark web. That includes Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, and Sam Harris, among others. And the reason that they've been elevated is because their whole job is to prevent young men from moving towards nationalism and Christianity in their ongoing rejection of the neoliberal world order.
That's why I'm talking to them. I'm trying to call them forth as individuals out of the chaos that they're ensconced in.
If you pay attention, you notice that none of these members of the approved opposition are Christians, and more importantly, everything you see come out of their mouths is anti-nationalist.
A person who is living abroad in Japan could be more of an American than a person who's born in Ohio.
Now, it's not always directly anti-nationalist, and Jordan Peterson is much more clever than Ben Shapiro in this regard.
The distance between the typical citizen and the bureaucracy that runs the entire structure has got so great that it's an element of destabilization in and of itself. And so people revert back to, say, nationalistic identities because it's something that they can relate to.
What Peterson does is to criticize globalist institutions like the European Union and the United Nations because he thinks that they are moving too fast, too far, for the public to accept.
Because we're not built for static utopia. We're built for a dynamic situation.
But the reality is, his long-term objectives are almost identical to the long-term goals of George Soros and other globalists. That may sound improbable, but in a recent interview with George Soros, the great financier of Antifa and global society rather improbably insisted that he is non-ideological. Jordan Peterson also claims to be non-ideological, despite his globalism, his employment by the United Nations, and his history as a socialist activist. In that same interview, George Soros said that his main concern was that the left has become too extreme, which happens to be precisely the same concern that was revealed by Peterson in what was billed as a debate on political correctness with Stephen Fry, Michael Dyson, and Michelle Goldberg.
And that's what this debate is about political correctness. It's about the left going too far. And I think it's gone too far in many ways. And I'd like to figure out exactly how and when so the reasonable left could make its ascendance again and we could quit all this nonsense.
Jordan Peterson is trying to fix globalism. He's actively seeking to destroy your nation and your faith because he believes it's necessary in order to save the world. So in conclusion, I'll ask you this. For what shall it profit a man if he shall clean his room and lose his own soul? I'm Vox Day. This is Voxiversity.